Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Chris Lockwood. I'm very glad you're here with us tonight. I'm especially grateful that you've joined us for this conversation with New York Times bestselling author Ruta Sepetys. Before we begin, just a quick note that the chat will be open throughout tonight's event, so please feel free to share your reactions and comments there. Ruta and our interviewer Tara will be responding only to the questions that were submitted during registration, though. I'd like to take a moment also to thank Naaman Kent, Katie Mudd, and Nicole Adams for all the care and effort they've put into making these events possible. Their work behind the scenes is what brings events like this to life, and I truly appreciate everything they've done. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's interviewer, Tara Ann Carter. Originally from Philadelphia, Tara holds a BA in English from Millersville University and an MA in non-traditional literature from Villanova University. She began her career with the Philadelphia Teaching Fellows, teaching English and social studies for 7 years in the school district of Philadelphia, before moving into independent education in St. Petersburg, Florida, and later in California. Tara has participated in 14 international travel programs, most recently researching AI policy in Brussels and Luxembourg, followed by a 4-week study through Central Asia. In her free time, she enjoys reading memoirs, long-distance running, and exploring the contemporary art scene of Los Angeles. Tara, thank you so much for being here and for guiding tonight's conversation. And over to you.
Thank you, Chris. I'm here today to welcome Ruta Sepetys, author of Salt to the Sea, among the Bletchley, Riddle, many other books over the last few, I would say, decade now. And to start us off, I want to read a little bio for you about Ruta, and then we'll dive into the questions that the students have sent in. So Ruta Sepetys is an internationally acclaimed #1 New York Times best-selling author of historical fiction published in over 60 countries and 40 languages. Considered a crossover novelist, her books are read both by students and adults worldwide. Winner of the Carnegie Medal and honored by the American Academy of Arts and Letters, Ruta is renowned for giving voice to underrepresented history and those who experienced it. Her books have won or been shortlisted for more than 50 book prizes, appear on over 40 state reading lists, and are currently in development for film and television. Ruta is the daughter of a Lithuanian refugee. Born in Michigan, she was raised in a family of artists, readers, and music lovers. She's passionate about the power of history to foster dialogue and global understanding. Her research and writing on human resilience have earned her invitation to speak at NATO, the European Parliament, the U.S. Capitol, the Library of Congress, and embassies worldwide. She's been awarded fellowships from the University of Oxford in England and the Rockefeller Center's Bellagio Center in Italy. The New York Times Book Review declared, Ruta Sepetys acts as a champion for the interstitial people so often ignored, whole populations lost in the cracks of history. And with that, I introduce Ruta. Hi, Ruta. How are you?
Hi, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
It is really a pleasure to speak with you. I myself am a big fan of your work. My mother actually recommended the first book of yours I read many, many years ago, Between Shades of Grey. And from there, anytime I glance across one of your new titles, I'm sure to pick it up and read it right away. Most recently, the National English Honor Society had our annual convention in New Orleans, and Out of the Easy was a perfect read on the plane ride home after that convention.
Oh, good. I hope it brought the city to life for you, and some of its history.
Absolutely. And I always like to read a book, it could be fiction or nonfiction, about a place after I've been there, because it really helps me visualize the story. And you definitely did that city justice. So
thank you.
There. But enough about me and my reading habits. Let's get to the students. The first question I have is from 3 different students asked a version of this question. We have Gabrielle from New York, Alexander from New Jersey, and Jose from Guatemala all want to know, what drew you to write about lesser known historical events instead of more widely known ones? And how do you balance staying true to real stories while creating characters that connect with modern readers?
Yes, these underrepresented events. I think that I was initially drawn to it because of perhaps my own misunderstood identity. Growing up in the US with this name, Ruta Sepetys, which in Lithuanian is Ruta Sepetys, but not many people speak Lithuanian. People would often ask, quote, "What are you?" And I'd say, "I'm Lithuanian." And that was the end of the conversation because Lithuania only regained their independence in 1990. Their freedom was still fragile. People didn't know, much about Lithuania. So I think my first entry into writing with my debut novel, Between Shades of Grey, was perhaps to express my own family's identity and story. And after doing so, realized how powerful that was. This was much bigger than me or just my family's story. And to your question about this balancing act, right? Yes, I always really strive to serve the history, not just the story. And mind you, there are many historical novelists who have different opinions. This is just my process. But, we have story and we have history. And I don't deviate too far from the history at all. If it's raining in my books, it's because I checked a weather table for that specific day, the timeline, when the events happened, the leaders, people who were involved. I don't deviate from that at all. And the reason being is that historical fiction sits on the shoulders of nonfiction. And I would never want a historical novel to become some sort of definitive source for a piece of history. No, not at all. My goal is to introduce a topic and then for the reader to say, wow, this is really interesting. I want to research more. I want to find the real story. So that balancing act is sometimes quite precarious.
I think you do it well, and this leads us into another question on a similar topic from Gianna Colana from New York as well. She wants to know, how much time do you spend researching books, and how much of that time is actually reading, researching versus writing and outlining and things like that? If you could dive a little bit more into that process.
Yeah, well, it takes me about 5 to 7 years to research and write a novel. And many people are mortified. They think, wow, 5 to 7, sometimes longer. My latest book, it took me 13 years. So as a result, I have to work on multiple projects at once in sort of a layered, tiered kind of format. But research is the larger part of my process. Once I choose a topic that I want to focus on and research, and I don't even know at that point, will there be a novel out of it? Will it be a short story? I spend probably a year or two just reading anything that I can get my hands on. So we're talking about nonfiction texts, history texts, papers by academics and historians, journals, memoirs, because the next step is to travel to the place where the events occurred and meet with true witnesses or family members of victims, family members who experienced what I'm writing about. So I really, out of respect, I need to have an understanding of the history. So I spend those first couple of years reading. So out of the 5 to 7 years, I would say, well, in the research, mind you, it never stops. My process is not separate. I don't research and then write. I worry that if I research and then years later begin to write, I'll lose that sense of emotional immediacy, especially after an interview. I mean, imagine the gift of sitting down with a true witness and asking them, what does it take to survive? And for them to tell you. And so I build in about an hour after every interview to draft dialogue, notes, scenes. So I'm doing that over the 5 to 7 years. But then as I'm drafting, revising, copy editing, the research continues because sometimes there will be something I'm trying to track down that I can't track down. But at the last minute, the source or something that I've been waiting for appears, and then I have to pull everything apart and begin to reweave it, so to speak.
That sounds like so much fun, honestly. I think you're the first person that I've heard sell 5 to 7 years worth of research as something so engaging and fun and curiosity driven.
Yeah, my friend, I was doing a school visit with one of my friends, Steve Schenken. We wrote the Bletchley Riddle together. And a student, when we were talking about research, the student said, so wait, you do homework for a living? And we don't think of it that way. I certainly don't. I want you to swap the word research for investigation. And that's what I'm doing over those 5 to 7 years. I'm an investigator of underrepresented history.
Yeah, I like that. That's a great way to put it. On that note, historical fiction is a very popular genre. And I love that you're thinking about young audiences. It's such a kind of pivotal way to introduce these things to people when they're in these formative years. And along those lines, Naya from Maryland asks, how do you navigate writing fiction alongside narrating facts, especially for a younger audience? Do you believe that the facts should be presented as is, or do you think that the point of view written in a time period is critical for helping young minds wrap their head around these ideas?
Oh, I love this question. I also love that she comments that historical fiction is a popular genre. I want people to know that when I first began many moons ago, and was submitting my manuscript for Between Shades of Grey around 2006. Everyone rejected that manuscript because historical fiction didn't sell. That's what they said. Historical fiction didn't sell. And I really used that to investigate why. Why? What are we missing? How are we not connecting these very impactful stories with readers? And to the question about point of view, that was something that I really want to examine. When I choose a topic, what is the point of view here? Because, it begs the question, what right do we have to history other than our own? I'm writing about something that I myself didn't experience. So point of view, yes, that is so important to my process. And I think about, okay, if I have experience from this, Between Shades of Grey, I'm the daughter of a victim of communism. So I might be able to feel like I write that from the inside out, and maybe I could write a first-person character. But let's say for my novel, The Fountains of Silence, set in Spain, post-war, post-Spanish Civil War during the dictatorship of Francisco Franco, I have no experience with that. I have to approach that from the outside in, collaborate with experts and witnesses, and also the point of view itself. I chose an American in Spain. I didn't feel comfortable that I should or could write the novel from the point of view of someone who was Spanish. So I put an American in Spain. So as I'm reading, all of these things become clear to me. The emotional beats of the story where I have, for example, I call it a heart hop. If I'm researching and I feel moved, I know, okay, there's something there. What is the correct point of view to convey that heart hop, so to speak, to the reader? So it's a huge part of my process. But once, with regard to the question of balancing, then once I have that point of view, then I feel like, okay, I have a footing. I know where I'm going here. And I'm more of a reviser than a writer. I rewrite my books notoriously like 15 times. I read them aloud, listening for rhythm and flow. If I stumble when I'm reading, the reader, you're going to stumble. So I prune and really strive for this economy of phrasing that will allow you to move through the story and the history quickly.
I absolutely feel that when I read your novels, which is why I think I enjoy them so much. As an English teacher in the upper school, a lot of times we have to read things and teach things that are difficult, sometimes on purpose. And to read something that it just flows so naturally, that's just an easy novel to read, and be able to instead focus on absorbing the world and the characters is really a special experience. And I think in historical fiction is few and far between. And maybe why our students are so interested in this genre, because of what you're doing with it.
Thank you.
Continuing with this line of questioning, I have three that are kind of similar. I think we want to start with this one. Aiden Jackson from Arkansas. Ask, with the testimonies you use, How do you go about representing these intimate and traumatic experiences with respect and authority?
Yes, what a sensitive and thoughtful question. I appreciate that.
Mhm.
Imagine I'm writing about experiences and time periods that were, as you say, very traumatic for people. Many people ask to remain anonymous, and of course, I honor that. And my technique, if that doesn't sound too obnoxious to say I have a technique, but my technique is that I will meet with, let's say, 20 different people and listen to their testimony and pull threads from those testimonies and then braid them together into one composite character. And this is a benefit that I have of writing fiction and nonfiction. If I were writing nonfiction, I would follow the path of maybe one character, one family. But through this braiding and weaving technique, I'm hoping that I can express a larger human experience. And so, one, it protects the anonymity of the people who are sharing their stories. Of course, the characters have different names. I work alongside the people who have given me this testimony. I ask, would you like to be a beta reader? And I can send you, chapters, and many of them say yes, that they would love to read. And it's so helpful for me because then they're correcting, no, not this, but this. And that braiding technique, I've had people come up to me at events and say, I don't know you and you don't know me. How is it that you have written my story? And I do believe it's because of this braiding and composite technique.
So in a similar line of questioning, Valerie Golden and Katie Theobald from New York would like to know, how do current events impact your ideas and the perspectives you take into consideration for your stories? Are you drawing an idea from the world around you currently, or do you remain focused in historical events and research for ideas?
What I draw is perspective from the current events. Knowledge of the past gives context to the present. And I know that people say, oh, well, it's very important that we share this history so history doesn't repeat itself. I have found through studying history that history inevitably does repeat itself in some form or fashion, but perhaps maybe not as in an intense a manner or a different way. So I want you to think about it this way. Current events. For me, current events, it's as if we're looking through a first floor window. There's a view, we see something, but we have a limited view. However, in being an investigator of history and a 30, 40-year window, that first floor window, it's as if I'm standing on the roof, right? I have a much larger perspective. At that point, I have access to documents, files, archives that perhaps right now are classified and things that we don't know. So with a current event, it might give me some perspective or context. I might be able to compare it to, oh yes, there's a touch point in this note of history or in this note of history. But I'm always cautious about current events because through my research and investigation, we don't see the full view. We don't have the full picture. And it's only after the fact, when we do this exciting work of peeling back the layers of history, that we can really find the truth. And that, in fact, inspired the title of my book, Between Shades of Gray.
I really like the building metaphor. That's very useful, I think, to weigh out the kind of two choices there. Thank you for that. I wonder if you ever feel pressure to, when you're thinking through and looking at these whole arcs of history, do you ever feel pressure to get it right? That there's I know you've talked about kind of raising consciousness of these other voices, but do you feel that there is any sort of need for, or not, I shouldn't say need, responsibility for you that you hold that maybe is different than other styles of writing because of all of the research that you put into your work?
as I said, my responses are my own, because other historical novelists, they really argue this point. They say, Ruta, it's fiction. It's fiction. It doesn't matter if Winston Churchill wasn't there. You can put him in a scene. No. And the reason being, I feel not only a responsibility, an enormous responsibility, an enormous amount of respect and gratitude for the people who have helped me with my research. You might note that my books, although they're historical, they're not set centuries past. And that's because I wouldn't have access to the people who experience the events. So my books are maybe 30, 40, 50 years from the event that I'm writing about, which gives me access to these incredible human beings. And I work with them. They work alongside me, as I've explained. And I feel so responsible that with every single novel, and you would think, oh, this gets easier, right? No, it doesn't. I would argue maybe it even becomes more challenging and it gets harder, because now I'm taking on more. I'm always looking to approach the piece of history in a different way than I have in the past. And I turn in the book, and then I go into pure panic mode, right? This is terrible. Oh my goodness. But because I'm so fortunate to work with the people, who experience the history, we then will get on the call and discuss this. And here's such a benefit about, I think, of writing historical fiction. The process, it continues. The book is published, and then a larger readership who may have experienced what I'm writing about, or their parents, or their grandparents, or their ancestors, they then can comment and say, in this chapter, in this paragraph, you wrote this, but the experience that I heard about was this. Or in the case of my first novel, I used the term genocide. And there was a reader, a historian, who emailed me and said, this is no big deal, but the word genocide, your book is set in 1941, and the word genocide was not used until 1942. And he said, I'm a historian. I find these things. He said, I probably shouldn't mention it. I was so grateful that he did mention it. And my publisher, on subsequent printings, we are able to correct the record. And I'm so grateful for that. And I put the person's name who helped me with the correction in the back. So if you have a first edition copy of one of my books, that's something, I guess, pretty rare, because every edition after has further corrections.
That's fascinating. I downloaded it via iBooks. I don't know, when was the book published? 2011. 2011. So yeah, it probably was like 2013. I downloaded it on iBooks. I'm curious. I'm going to have to go back and look. Yeah. And I wonder if iBooks, do ebooks update themselves with current versions?
Yes. So the publisher generally goes in, and when they have that data file, that goes not only to, the print publishers, but to the digital ebook edition as well.
Oh, wow. What a fascinating peek behind the curtain of publishing as well.
I have to say, my publisher is very rare, Penguin Random House. I don't know if all publishers would do this. They are so generous with me to respect my desire to honor these people and to get it right. Yeah. That's
great. That's really nice to hear about a publishing company, especially one so large as Penguin Random House, that they are interested in honoring those voices. That's fantastic. Speaking of honoring voices, have you ever discovered a detail so compelling that you had to change your original plan to include that as you were doing your research? This comes from Kate Early in Florida.
Yes, always. This is the way it is. And so now my publisher, whereas before, where they used to say, all right, we know you've been researching and writing, but really we just need you now to continue the writing process and put the research behind you. But what they found is that I find these details, and then I have to no, and they really do help the story. and the presentation of the story. So now they do allow me at the last minute. I'm working on a draft right now about a certain topic. It's a book on historical stigma and millions of human beings who were arrested and exiled to remote islands because they were thought to have this very contagious disease. And I came upon a story about a high school student from Boston High School. And it was so compelling but now I know better. I go to my publisher and I said, hey, this is what I found, and this is what I'm thinking. And so I need to, imagine if you've knitted a sweater, an entire sweater, and then you think, oh, no, you know what? I want to put this pattern in or this stitch. And so now I know better to go to my editor and say, are you okay if I do this? And generally now they say, yes, do it. There's only been a few times where they say, Ruta, we think you're going overboard. For sure, I am.
So maybe this can be one of the things that went overboard. I don't know, but we have a question that's the opposite side of the coin, which is, what's something you found in your research that didn't make it into a book? Specifically, Catherine from Illinois asks about Salt to the Sea or the Bletchley Riddle, but I think any a bit of something that and how it ended up not making it would be an interesting anecdote as well.
Oh, sure. Well, specifically, okay, since she asked about Salt to the Sea, first, the general answer is always. There are always these wonderful details. I need to verify those details, again, because I'm such a terrible stickler, and I understand it's fiction. But if students are reading this, I want it to be as authentic and as close to factual as possible. So someone might tell me something in an interview. Well, I need to verify those details, right? But there was something in Salt to the Sea. I discovered that there was a stowaway. And part of me wondered, like, oh, this sounds almost a bit, whether it's the Titanic or, we know these stories of stowaways. But this was a very compelling detail that I discovered. And so I tracked it down, and I tracked down the family of this man who was a stowaway. And they said, yes, he was a stowaway. And please don't include that. And my publisher said, no, you have to include this. This is great. This is such color and texture for the story. And I said, no, let's not. And since the book has been published, the family they've come to events. They shared their ancestor's scrapbook with me that even had the strap from his life vest from the sinking of the ship. So yeah, very interesting. What does make it into the book and what doesn't?
Yeah. I find that our students are fascinated with the writing process as well as the content across the board when it comes to talking to authors and asking questions. Similarly, Jory Hastings wants to know, of all of the characters in your book, was there one voice or story that was difficult to write about?
Yes. And out of all of the books, the character of Emilia in Salt to the Sea was extremely difficult to write. Some of my characters can be kind of humorous. They can be kind of lighthearted. The character of Lizzie in the Bletchley Riddle is kind of lighthearted. Alfred is such I would say an evil character that almost on the brink of of a caricature. There's this kind of separation. But I wanted to express the vulnerability, the emotional truth of this character of Emilia, who is a young Polish girl separated from her family, who has experienced, the beast of war and brutality of war. And I think I worked so hard to do it in a sensitive and gentle way so the reader would connect with her, coming up with different symbolisms and themes. And she's wearing a pink hat. I don't want to give away what that foreshadows in the book, but that character, it took my whole heart and soul to write that character. And you never know. It's up to the reader to determine if the author has accomplished and has done a good job. The reader determines the value. It's up to the reader and not for the author to explain it.
Ruta, we have a question from Kara Bechtel in Georgia that asks about the rough parts of the stories you're telling, war, violence, things like that. How do you draw the line between striking emotional impact without oversharing or traumatizing, especially young middle school readers?
Yes, this addresses my attempts as a writer to try to develop skills and challenge myself to describe something in a way that is compelling. And let's keep in mind, I'm considered a crossover author. So depending on the book, Bletchley Riddle is read by some students as young as 4th grade, whereas I have events in assisted living facilities with people in their 90s who experienced the wars that I've written about, right? So I want to write in a way that describes the situation without being gratuitous, right? Where a reader who is older might understand exactly what I'm talking about, whereas maybe perhaps a younger reader, if they're not at that level yet, it's described in a way that won't register. In Salt to the Sea, in Between Shades of Gray, I'm describing these scenes of brutality along the side of the road as the refugees are walking this trail, to board the ship. And the scenes of brutality, things like a woman on the side of the road and her skirt is knotted high. That description, I hope an adult reader will understand, and maybe a younger reader. If they're not, there have been students who have commented, oh my goodness, these people were cold and their clothes were askew and things like that. So I really challenge myself, and then also to ask, to pick and choose what's important, what's truly important here, what will best honor people who experienced it. So yeah, I try very hard not to be gratuitous, but to write it in a way that will elicit empathy and compassion, to allow the readers to use the greatest gifts we have as humans, right? And then therefore to care for someone we've never met, right? To care for someone we're reading about on the page.
I think building empathy is so important, especially in our current climate. And we're fortunate to have these texts as vehicles to work on doing that. I see that all the time in my classroom.
Good.
All right, so we have a few questions now that are a little more not necessarily about writing of books, but about you and some of your experiences. Nolan from Eagan, Tennessee wants to know, what did you learn from your experiences when speaking at NATO, the European Parliament, and the U.S. Capitol?
Oh, fellow Tennessean, I'm in Nashville. Lovely to meet you. Thank you for this question. What I've learned, first of all, public speaking. I think authors, many of us are introverts, right? It's frightening. So first I learned it's worth it to get over my nerves to do this. And why? Because knowledge of story facilitates human understanding and progress. And I learned that at European Parliament. When I was asked to speak at European Parliament, I was a bit confused because I thought, this is Parliament. They know these stories. And I, in particular, was writing about Between Shades of Gray and people of the Baltics and Poland and many countries that were deported to Siberia. And I chatted and gave my speech, and one of the members from Greece, Parliament members from Greece, raised his hand and said, I'm going to be honest, I didn't know this story. And he said, and mind you, this was probably in 2012, and he said, the Baltic countries, Lithuania, they're always talking about energy independence ad nauseum, And he said, I'm sitting here putting together, you don't want to buy energy from the country that occupied you for half a century. And he said, you've just made this very human for me. And I thought, wait a minute. We can never take for granted that other people will understand our story or our history. And if we don't know each other's history, we are constantly misjudging each other, right? We're creating false narratives. Why are these people talking about this? Why is this important to them in their politics? Why is this? When you know that history and the story, you really, get to make true progress. And progress isn't permanent. We constantly have to work for that. But speaking at NATO and European Parliament and some of these other venues has given me an opportunity to hopefully facilitate that kind of conversation.
Wow. That's a great way to bring perspective into these political discussions. And by a novelist, nonetheless. I think that's fantastic.
Maybe I'm a bit safe facilitator. You know, they see me as a safe facilitator.
Well, I mean, even in the course of this conversation, we've talked about you do your research, you're thoughtful about what you're including, you're trying to voice and promote empathy. I think these are all things that we should be doing more of and socially encouraging. Again, I said we have questions about you and some of your experiences beyond writing. And this one, I guess, is kind of technically about writing. But feel free to voice any opinions you have. It could be about your own books or others. How has AI impacted the field that you work in? Or hasn't it? What's good? What's bad? I think this is definitely something that's at the forefront of many people's minds, including the people who asked the question, which were Melissa Ross from New York and Kel Saucy from Michigan.
Yes, it's sort of the question of the day, isn't it? AI. In terms of my writing, it hasn't impacted. And I often tell students that the material I need, no Google search and no AI agent is going to bring me that information. These are testimonies that have never been voiced, that have never been spoken. They are files in archives that I have to travel to the most remote village in a country where these things aren't even digitized. 2 weeks ago, I was in the National Archives in Barbados. And I mean, the things were not climate controlled. Not only were they weren't digitized, I had to dig through these papers to find what I need. So for me, AI can't really help me there. The other thing that I feel about AI, a caution about it, and also I do want to say that prior to becoming a novelist, I spent 22 years working in the music industry, and I was helping songwriters and bands and musicians tell stories through music. I had a front row seat to creativity that way. And so I saw an entire paradigm shift when Napster came about, this digital delivery method and Pro Tools, and the entire process changed, and everyone said, this is going to be such a collapse. But what I found through that paradigm shift is that it really supported entrepreneurship, that now the barriers of entry that may have existed before, didn't exist. But what I saw was that musicians, they really had to use their heart, their soul, their mind to take advantage of these new systems. And I see a parallel with AI. And I think Dr. Angus Fletcher, who is the professor of story science at The Ohio State University, please follow his comments and writings about AI. He said it best. Think about it. AI is probability, and our brains possibility. So AI is like a calculator, and it has access to this previous content. But think of it as humans. We are like the coolest Swiss Army knife, right? Our brain has so many different, we can access and use so many different parts of ourselves, sentient beings, to put into our writing. And AI doesn't have that, right? Do I think it could be used alongside? Yes, I imagine that it could be used alongside a writing process. But for me personally, no, not yet. I'm still using the Swiss Army knife of a brain that I have in these techniques. I developed my own form of shorthand. So when I'm doing field research and I'm interviewing someone and they're frightened about what they're telling me, I can actually write it in shorthand and show them. And they say that's illegible. And I said, it's illegible, but not to me. So detection methods. And so we'll see how it develops. I do find, though, that one thing I am seeing, and I will encourage students, work on your communication, your verbal communication skills. Yes, these LLMs and AI agents are putting things together. But what's going to happen? AI will replace, I think, some positions and things, but we still need to be able to talk to one another, right? Civil discourse, civil debate, to be able to discuss something. And if you can develop that skill and in a diplomatic way, there will be a job for you. There absolutely will. We are going to need really strong communicators.
I absolutely agree with that. My role here at the school, I'm in the Director of Educational Technology, and I oversee a lot of things, but part of my portfolio is AI and AI programming. And the kind of big mantra I pushed forth this year, which I've taken directly from a book by Ethan Moll, Co-Intelligence, is keep the human in the loop. It's great for, working through and sorting data and things like that, but especially with education, keeping that human touch in the loop is ultra important.
Yeah.
And I believe, similar to your communication piece, are part of what both makes us human and keeps us human.
Conflict resolution through AI. If AI is agreeing with us and assisting and helping, what will happen in our discourse when we don't agree with someone? We have to find a way. To resolve our differences, which leads me to, if I can just share this, because it pertains to one of my books. Some people ask me, well, what happens if you write something and someone who experienced what you've written about, what if they disagree or think that you approached it from the wrong angle, right? And this happens where you're at an event and a reader comes who really disagrees. And I was at an event in Lithuania, and the bookseller came to me and said, we have an audience member. I'm not sure if we should allow her in. And I said, why? And they said, because she really does not like your book. And I said, oh, no, absolutely. We need to let her in. She had a very different feeling. She felt that I focused on one area of Siberia, and she would have liked for me to focus on another part of Siberia. But she came in with, guns a-blazing, and the audience was a bit uncomfortable. But what was important, she was a family member of someone who had been sent to Siberia. So we talked about it in this open forum. And when we talked about it, and I was explaining to the audience, I hope you can see why she's so passionate about this, and that this is her narrative that's not reflected in this story. And at the end of the conversation, she said, well, I still don't like your book, but I think I might like you. And do you see that? Do you see that is the progress that I'm speaking about? This woman came in convinced that she didn't like me. She didn't like the book. We had nothing in common. And then through conversation, oh my goodness, she's like, I don't like your book, but yeah, I like you. Like, great. This is wonderful. That's the best kind of book discussion. Some students will really like the book, will like some characters. Other students don't. And we're all right. And we all have a right to our own opinion. And it's so important.
I really appreciate your openness to, it's almost like you open your text to discussion, to interpretation, to once they're out with the audience, they're up for co-construction. And I think that that's a unique way to be an author. And I really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. That co-construction, I don't know if that's just me, because think about it. Reading is a creative partnership. And unlike, and this is why, of course, I think it's a deeper experience than watching a TV show or a film. In a TV show or film, they show you the characters. They show you the setting. But with a book, the author provides the text and the reader infuses life and emotion. They create the setting, they create the character. And as such, the reader is invested and has ownership. And that's why I think when we go and we see a movie adaptation, we think, oh man, that I remember when I first saw Harry Potter, I thought, no, that's not my Harry. It's not my Harry.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's okay. But we're co-creating all the time. And I love that co-creation, something I did in the music business, rather than where someone serves us and shows us the story.
Yeah. We have one more question that I think is a way to think about how people are reading and interpreting your work as well. It comes from Gabriel Eckstein in Ohio, and they ask, first they state, I was teaching Salt to the Sea during my student teaching experience and had many questions from students about Alfred. So students are interpreting here. How would you recommend explaining Alfred's inclusion and significance in the novel to students?
Oh, thank you for this question. I love this. Okay, so for people who might not be familiar with Salt to the Sea, 1945, 4 young people, 2 young men, 2 young women, and they all arrive at the port and they board this doomed ship. So of the 4 people, we talked about perspective and point of view. How am I going to approach the story? So this question about Alfred, why did you include this? Well, as I was researching, I learned it was a German ship, the ship, the Wilhelm Gustloff, but there were people from so many different countries and cultures on this ship. So I thought 4 characters, 4 alternating voices, right, to present history. Well, it was a German ship, and I needed to represent that German perspective, and I needed to give the reader eyes and ears into the process.
Once again, I'll see
the process and the internal workings of the ship itself. So I decided to include this Nazi sailor, Alfred. And okay, this is kind of some talk about peeling back the layers inside baseball. It's not a spoiler, but to create the character of Alfred, because remember, Hitler is at the forefront here, and it is pardon the pun, dictating everything. So to create the character of Alfred and that psyche, I studied Hitler as a teenager. So from the time he was 11 until he was maybe 16. And it turns out that when Hitler was young, he fell in love with a girl named Stephanie, and he wrote her all of these letters. And a childhood friend of Hitler who wrote a book explained that he took a peek at these letters that were never sent. And he said they were almost delusional, that this version that Hitler had of himself was very different than who he was. And so I gave that character trait to Alfred to pose the question, how are these systems of power built and supported? Do we create these people, through othering and bullying? And I sort of give some hints with Hitler, and I give a hint to the reader in one of the sections where Alfred is, he's waxing on about his bravery, and if I die, the only way people will identify me is by a number on my identification tag. And in the chapter, Alfred reads off the number. It's Hitler's birthday. And so the German students who were reading Salt to the Sea, they immediately knew, this is how this character was built and constructed. Oh yes, we're seeing that Alfred had difficulties with his father. He had he has problems with his hands. These are just some hints about the characters of Alfred. The butterflies, those were all taken from Hitler. So how do we explain this in conclusion? What we do, I think, is let's use Alfred and discuss nature versus nurture. And if Hitler was the model, Hitler as a teenager, to create Alfred, how could we pull threads from that? And could we see where that might go in the future and who Alfred is and might become? And so sort of as a vehicle for discussion. And I have to say, Alfred was not a difficult character for me to write, which tells me that either, wow, I can go really dark and deep, or is he a bit of a cliche, this evil villain, where I told you the character of Amelia was much more difficult to write?
Yeah, I think that's a great bookend to close this conversation, which I think we covered a lot of ground in. And I surely believe that we've prepared our students with some reflections on being a writer, on the process of writing, as well as readership, I think, as well.
Oh, thank you. And
Rachel.
I want to say, though, that I've been talking about underrepresented history and the importance in honoring people. I want students to know that the most important history that they can find and preserve, archive for their family, it's their own. We all wish that we had better archived our ancestors' history. So think about that. If your grandparents have a box of old paper photos that are unlabeled, the greatest gift you can give, sit with your family and say, Grandma, who is this? And where was this? Now we have the benefit of location tagging on our photo. But where was this? What was the context? Again, what was the context of this photo? That's your history and that's your story. And it's a way to preserve it.
Wonderful. Thank you again for your time and your insight. I appreciate it. And I know that the students of the National English Honor Society do as well.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Ruta, and thank you, Tara, for such a thoughtful, engaging conversation. It's been a real pleasure to listen, and we're all very, very grateful to both of you for sharing your time and your insights with us this evening. And thank you to everyone who has joined us. Your attendance and your questions made this event all the more meaningful. A recording of tonight's webinar will be available on our YouTube channel at Sigma Tau Delta English, so feel free to subscribe and stay connected for future programming. And if you're interested in reading Salt to the Sea, the Bletchley Riddle, or any of Ruta's other works, we invite you to visit the English Honor Society's bookshop page. Every purchase there helps support authors and independent bookstores. Ruta's next book is coming out on May 26th. It's called A Fortune of Sand, so please make sure you pre-order it on bookshop.org as soon as you can to make sure you get it on the day that it's published. For chapters planning to read Salt to the Sea together, we've also created a new book club kit that will be soon be available on both the NEHS and Sigma Tau Delta websites. And while this is our final webinar of the school year, we're already looking forward to an exciting 2026-2027 series. Upcoming speakers will include poet Rob Colgate, non-fiction author Dashka Slater, actor and novelist Maulik Pancholi, historical fiction writer Kristen Hanna, Jane Austen scholar Devney Loja, and poet Danica Kelly, with some more to come. Thank you again for being part of this evening. Have a wonderful summer, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar in September. Good night.